Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Lauren Kaufman, and I'd like to welcome you to the Neurocritical Care Society podcast. Today, you've tuned in to another episode in our Perspectives series, where we explore the diverse perspectives in neurocritical care. Today, we're going to revisit a former story of hope that was featured in Currents. We will be joined by Rachael Muggleton from an article that was published in May of 2022, and we'll talk more about her story and see what she's up to now. And we are also joined by Jenna Ganillo, who was part of her care team. So welcome both of you to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having us. I'm so excited.
Yeah, it's awesome to share Rachel's story.
Yeah, and this is a really interesting podcast for us because the first time we will have the person who told their story plus someone who took care of them. So it'll kind of be like a full circle deal here. Rachael, for those that haven't read the story, can you just tell us a little bit about what happened? This goes back to May 2020, is that right?
Yes, that is correct. So it was right kind of the onset of COVID, I think almost like a couple weeks after it got announced and the big thing. I was sent home. I went to Penn State University. I was sent home to do online classes for the remaining part of the semester. And as I was wrapping up kind of my last few finals, I started to notice I was getting overly anxious. I was kind of worrying about things that I typically wouldn't have. I didn't want to sleep alone. I would ask my mom to sleep with me at night. And then honestly, pretty rapidly, I just started to lose like my cognition. I didn't know who I was. I didn't recognize my brother. I was making weird noises. I was doing repetitive motions a lot. And then I evidently had a seizure on May 13th of 2020, and they rushed me to the hospital. Of course, it was very different because COVID and no one kind of knew what was going on. And I stayed a couple of nights in the ER there, and thankfully a neurologist actually noticed my eyes kind of do a weird twitch thing. And he said, this was a smaller hospital in Corning. He said, we don't have the resources to care for her. She needs to go somewhere else. And my mom is so grateful that that man just happened to be in the ER that day. So they sent me up to University of Rochester that night. Still not quite sure what was going on with me. I was just having these seizures after seizures after seizures, and my body was kind of breaking down. And again, like I didn't know who I was. So I got there. As far as I know, again, this is kind of secondhand told to me as my mental state was very altered. I was placed in a coma. I think it took them a couple of days to realize that I had anti-NMDAR autoimmune encephalitis. I had the world's best team. My neuroimmunologist actually knew the guy who first diagnosed someone with autoimmune encephalitis. So he contacted him, like, what are the odds? And once they finally realized what I had, they started treatment right away. And it was a very tough treatment. I was in, like, I think the most sedative coma you can basically be in. They tried to wake me up after, I think, 3.5 months. Didn't work so well. They put me back into it. And then eventually I went down once I was allowed to be out of my coma, and I was kind of seizure free for a good amount of time. I went into inpatient rehab a couple floors lower. And basically for the next month and a half, I relearned how to walk, to talk, I had a feeding tube and I had a trach at the time as well. So, swallow tests, and I had every therapist you could possibly try to name. And just trying to get me back to at least a level that I could comfortably be home without a lot of worry. Not to say that when I got home, it was easy by any means. But once I got home, I did outpatient rehab. So I did physical therapy. I did speech therapy. I did all of that same stuff I did in the hospital, just more outpatient, kind of like, how am I going to get back to normal 20-year-old lifestyle?
Yeah, it's a lot. I think it was 6 months you were in the hospital. Is that right?
It was, yes. It was 6 months, and 6 months on top of COVID is, I think, what's very interesting about my story is it almost can't be replicated again, because it was like that exact time with that exact thing. is so rare and so unlikely to happen again that it was just kind of like everybody kind of had to learn something new during that period of time. Like, how are we going to keep her parents and family informed? How are we going to keep her comfortable? I'm a huge extrovert. I love to be around my people. I love to feel that love. Like, how are we going to give that to her too? Because that was a huge part of my recovery was the people around me showing love and showing support and like being there for me. I don't think I could have done it without that. So my actual like physicians and nurses and the providers there had to kind of step up to the role of family and friends and like, how can I make Rachel feel loved even though she has no idea who I am? But and they did an excellent job. I can't even
I mean, speaking of the team, like, why don't we hear a little bit from Jenna? So you were part of the ICU team for several months, it sounds like, that took care of Rachel. Is that right?
Yeah, so Rachel actually came and was admitted to the floor, which I find completely incredible, honestly. That she was not intubated when she came to us. And then we got a call like in the middle of the night and we're like, we got this young girl, she's making us really nervous. And I came in maybe the second day that you were intubated. And we just started going and she kept seizing. And it was really difficult. And like Rachel said, she was maximal medical therapy to the point where we put her on a ketogenic diet. And then just crossed our fingers and hope for the best. We at that point kind of adopted her as the APP team. We have 6 to 8 of us, including our per diems, and we got very protective of her very quickly because at that point, as the rest of you guys know that are listening, it was kind of weird with staffing. And so the consistency that we had was the APPs, our attendings, and our fellows. And we just connected with her because I want to say it, but we're all kind of young. And we could see ourselves in her, and her mom is just wonderful. And her PCP called to check in on her every day. And it was so nice to just have that extra set of ears, somebody that really knew Rachel that could tell us what she was like and how we could help her wake up when we were getting to that point, and how we could really best support her and her family during this. And I was there the day that we first Zoomed with her mom, and Rachel will never remember it because we had her on ketamine. But we made sure that her mom was ready, that she had somebody at home with her because she was, not in Rochester at that point. And we were also afraid of COVID, that they were saying you can have one visit to see your daughter. And we just weren't sure how it was going to go. And so we didn't want Carrie to make this decision to come see her when she's sedated, and then never be able to come again. You just didn't know. So she was really very patient with us and really a wonderful communicator and a great advocate for Rachel, and sent us all of the mail that anyone ever sent to their house. So we decorated her rooms, and we ended up putting her right outside the APP office in the back of our unit. And so we just were there all the time, and we would check in with her even, when we were just walking by and she wasn't our patient that day, making sure she was doing okay. Making sure that all of her pictures were up the right way, making sure nursing didn't need anything. And we ended up holding on to her. We sent her out 4th of July down to the floor, and almost immediately she said, absolutely not, and had a seizure. And then we had to do it all over again.
Yep.
Yeah. And so then, and I was there, I remember sending you out and being like, I feel like this can happen, but I don't feel worried about this. And then Rachel, right before I left, was like, no way, I gotta come back to my room. So we just put her right back in her same room. I remember calling her mom and being like, oh my God. And it was me and Dr. Roberts, our medical director. And we were both just like heartbroken that she had this setback, and we were like, she was doing so great, but we were able to watch as she got better and we figured it out. And I was there the first day that she walked, and we would go outside. And so we were able to actually keep her, and we felt like we were keeping her safe on our unit, and watch her progress, which so many times you don't get to see in like critical care and neurocritical care, especially. And then we're very, very lucky that the rehab unit she went to is in our hospital, just literally 3 floors down from the ICU. And so we would go on little trucks and visit her and like take her outside and crash her therapy sessions. And we actually still have some of the art that she made up in the nurse leader office on the unit. And she's very much still like part of our family. And I think as much as she won't remember a lot of the things that we did with her, for us, we're never going to forget her.
I mean, it sounds like it was a super tough case of like super refractory status, and it was really difficult to control. I think you got multiple kinds of immunosuppressive medications. You mentioned ketogenic diet. It sounds like the ICU team just kept pushing through. Is that right? What was the team thinking? Like every time you tried something new and it just wasn't effective.
We had probably the most aggressive epileptologist I've ever met, and I would want her to take care of me if this was my case, on the team. And she also adopted Rachel. Like, she would be not on service and watching, and we would get calls from her and be like, I see that this is happening. I was like, aren't you supposed to be on vacation? And she also made sure that she was the one that followed up with Rachel outpatient during her de-escalation. So I think everybody bought into this, like, she's going to make it out of here. And there wasn't a question of whether or not it was going to happen. It was when. And so we just kept going. We consulted everyone that you could think of. Her mom was all over, the small message boards and the Facebook groups of people that have had this disease before. And she's like, have we tried this? What about that? And then, we did a little rituximab and started to see something emerge a little bit. And here we are. So it was, a journey, but Rachel did not
like very, very long journey. And you guys brought up some interesting points. I mean, being in the hospital for that many months in itself is such a challenge. But then during COVID, especially, I think it was over a month before your mom got to visit. Is that right?
Yeah, it was 41 days. She remembers that very vividly.
Sure she does. But we talk about in the ICU ways to like humanize our patients, and it sounds like you had lots of pictures and mail up in the room. Do you remember any of that happening, or do you have like any blips of like in your mind of like bits and pieces of any of that time, or is it just kind of all gone?
Definitely not the ICU. I do remember bits and pieces of inpatient rehab. I would say in part, yes, due to my brain injury, but also in part due to the fact that I was on so many medications that I was like this groggy vegetable. So it was like keeping those memories in was a little hard, but I remember walking. I remember there was this big chair I loved in the rehab room, and I would always, like, if I did like something like good and I walked down the hallway, I would ask if I could sit in the big chair. And I do remember my room because I remember us packing it up, and I wanted to take everything. Like, just they had these little like fluffy kind of like decorative flowers in the ceiling. I wanted everything that was in that room. I wanted like all of my physical therapy like schedules, all of that stuff. And I remember there was like a countdown board that I didn't really conceptualize at the time, but like I remember having it. I hated showering. That was like the one thing I do remember is so clustered, because you would have to have like, I couldn't really stand on my own. So there was like this tiny little shower, and there's like 4 of us in there, and there's hot water. And I remember just like refusing to shower. But yeah, little things like that. In my speech pathologist, I remember she said, like, if I passed X, Y, and Z of my swallow test, she would buy me my favorite soda to drink. And I remember I couldn't think of the name of it. And I remember getting frustrated with that. And I think that was the first time I had like self-recognized how little cognitive ability I had. And I think that was kind of like shocking, but yeah, little things I remember. But again, like, it's hard to decipher from what do I actually remember and what was told to me secondhand, especially at this point. It just, I tell a lot of people when I talk about the time in the ICU, it almost feels like I'm reading a script of somebody else's life, because I didn't live it essentially. Like, yes, my body was physically there, but I was not conscious at all. And I didn't really like, and even like the weeks leading up to going into that, I don't remember any of that. That's all secondhand told to me. So it's, I used to get very emotional about it, but now it just seems like I know it sounds kind of like insensitive to myself, but it just doesn't feel real, because I wasn't like every day waking up living through this like excruciating illness.
I mean, it sounds like your family were really the ones that were like living through it, because they're the ones that are helping, piecing these memories together for you. So you mentioned a little bit about how great the ICU team was and the rehab and therapists were. Like, what would you tell like other family members that are going through certain situations, and like how can the ICU team help those people?
Yeah, I think it goes both ways. Like, I think I was lucky and fortunate in my specific situation, but I feel like it should be kind of a general thing that you do all the time. I think you really need to understand who that person was before they came to you and before they came in such a frail and kind of hopeless state. What were they before? Like, for me, it was like, I loved my friends. I always wanted to be a doctor. Like, I went to Penn State. I was this very hardworking student. And I think internalizing that and understanding like, oh wow, like this is who she was before. And no, maybe she might not get back to that same exact person, and that's completely fine, but at least like, how can I understand her past life and give her like maybe little pieces of joy that she needs now? Like, they took me out one day to play outside, and they brought my brother outside, and like, my brother's my best friend, and I hadn't seen him in, what, at that point, 3.5, 4 months. And he was living in Rochester. He was that close, but just because of COVID, and just knowing things like that, like knowing who their family is, who their friends are, getting those cards, getting those pictures, surrounding for that day. When you do wake up, you don't feel like cold and why am I in a hospital and this is confusing and this is weird. And it makes that transition, not that it's an easy transition by any means, makes it a little bit easier. And I think on the parental side of things is having a level of trust, but also like understanding that you do have a say in things. My mom is by no means any medical background at all, business person through and through. And she relied a lot on not only U of R's team, but her team at Arnett, asking questions, ask questions when you don't know, research things when you don't know, shoot ideas. The worst is they're gonna say, oh, hey, like that doesn't make sense to work. But at least knowing that you have a voice in that situation, like, yes, maybe you're not a medical provider, but at the end of the day, you are the parent, or you are the friend, or you are the sibling, and you still have a say in how things go. So I think just like the trust between the patient and the parent and the provider in both ways.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely something, I try to do, but it's something I think all of us that work in the ICU can definitely do more, is to like humanize our patients, learn more about them and like what their life was before they ended up in the ICU. Jenna, do you think, was this the first time you took care of someone so extensively, saw them get better, and then kind of kept in touch with them?
Oh, yeah, for sure. When I was in nursing room trauma, we had a young girl who had a polytrauma accident, and we saw her progress, but then she was also from like kind of the top of Pennsylvania area. And when she went out, they sent her to a peds floor because she was 17 at the time, and they were like, no, we want her back. So for me, that was like, oh, like Rachel's young, she's gonna stay in adult land. Like, we're gonna get her out of here. And at that point, Rachel, I think I told her this before, no one knew I was pregnant because it was COVID. And I was just like, I don't want to tell anybody, like, then I can't come to work in the ICU, right? And I was like, my kid's gonna be fine. They're hard. And so I was like hanging out with her one day before her mom could come visit, because like sometimes we would just go in there and chart, so she wasn't by herself. And it was like the whole unit, like nurses would go in, the AVPs, sometimes our attendings would drop in, and I was just like talking to her, charting, and I was like, Rachel, like, I'm gonna have a baby and then you can babysit. And so like every time I would see her, I would tell her that. And then the day she came back was 4th of July. And that was like the first day that everyone was like, oh, you got a baby in there? And I was like, yes. And Rachel's going to babysit. And she came back and we put her back on the bed. And I remember sitting over your bed and being like, girlfriend, this is not the way this ends. Like, you have things to do. I need a babysitter, and you cannot go into orthopedics. Like, her mom had shared that she wanted to be an orthopod. I was like, you're destined for great things. You, not to quote my attending, Ahmad Khan, but you could be a neurocritical care person. Like, so I don't know that we've really got her away from that. But for us as a group, we really hadn't had a patient that was so young that we really connected with, like, even in a values way, somebody that's extroverted, that is so full of life and really interested in our like specialty in medicine and the healthcare field. And then also having a family that was just so amazing and supportive and respectful, and just like asked these very pointed but very intelligent questions, where it was like we had another brain that was working with us. And it was so wonderful.
I mean, you mentioned the interest in medicine, and that brings up like a really cool point. You actually went back to shadow that year, didn't you? Want to just talk about that a little bit?
Oh, I would love to. It was so full circle. So yes, last year, my senior year of college, I spent 10 days of my Christmas break up in Rochester, shadowing. I got the chance at 2 out of my 3 neurointensivists I got to shadow with, the tail end of one and the whole week with the other. And it was full circle. It was amazing because I remember going there and Dr. Khan, like we were talking about earlier, walked right past me. And I was like, oh, okay. So I like ran up to him and I was like, hey, I'm supposed to shadow with you today. And he's like, oh, no. I'm shadowing with an old patient, Rachel. And I'm like, that's me. And he like jaw to the floor, shocked. He was like, Rachel, you're walking. You don't even look the same. You're talking. You're well spoken. Like what? This is. And he was in awe. And I was his shadow. I did not leave his side, and I followed him everywhere. And he gave me homework, and we ate lunch together. And I was technically only supposed to be there till 2, and I ended up staying till like 6 every night because I loved it. And it was just. It's dark and it's a lot. I think it's different to see it from the other side that like I kind of it's hard. It's a quiet floor. You could probably hear a pen drop because everyone's like asleep or sedated and I don't think I was expecting that. I was expecting like some sort of chaos, but it's kind of like an eerie calm. So it took a little bit to get used to that because I kind of was getting these flashbacks of trying to picture myself in that and I had to be like, wait, picture myself here in this full circle moment and how beautiful this is and kind of suck that up and don't think about it in that way. But yeah, it was definitely dark. And I had a conversation with Dr. Khan one lunch, like, how do you not take this home? Like, how do you have, because I'm very open-minded in specialties and where I go with my career from here. But how do you not take this home? How are you still like a lively person? How do you look at your kids at night and not like fear like things that may never happen. And he's like, it's people like you. And like Jenna kind of touched on, he did as well. They don't see that often. They don't see the full circle because when they're awake, they get sent somewhere else. They don't stay there and they don't recover and they don't get discharged from there. They usually go somewhere else and then get discharged. So he's like, seeing people like you come back and shadow and visit or show interest in medicine or hearing, that you had your first kid or things like milestones like that at the time never even felt realistic. And there's not a lot of them, he admitted. It's not always like that, and it is hard, and you do have to leave a lot of things at the door, and that's just the name of the game in all of medicine. But without you, they would be far worse. You did the best you could, regardless of the outcome. And you doing the best you could is better than doing nothing. You're still there and you're still trying to fight it as hard as you can. And whether you win or whether you don't, you are a key part of at least getting it better is kind of how he worded it to me, which I think is very true. It's like, you can't like be down on yourself for the inevitable. Things will happen, whether you've tried your hardest or, so that was definitely a conversation I had to have with at least someone, because I'm like, how are you guys so happy and smiley? Because this is hard.
I can totally relate to that. I'm a neurointensivist as well. We don't, just like you said, we have our patients in the ICU. When they're ready to leave the ICU, they move on to their next phase of care, and I'm not involved in that. And occasionally, sometimes the neurosurgeons will send us pictures or video updates when they see them in clinic. And I also can't recognize patients, but it's like, I have a handful of patients that I distinctly remember them being in our ICU for months at a time. And then however far along down the road, they walk in to say hello. And that truly is one of the things that does keep you going. Jenna, did anyone from the team recognize Rachel?
Well, so, sometimes we can get off the floor a little bit more easily. We can be like, oh, we're just going to like go to the cafeteria. And so a lot of us would like sneak away and go visit Rachel. So we had an idea of what she looked like. And so we weren't as surprised, I think. And then a lot of people have connected with her and her mom on social media too. Whereas our attendings usually don't. They tend to keep boundary. But for a lot of us, we made the exception and broke the boundary because of COVID and how well she was doing and just trying to give her mom that support when she was so far away. But I was going to ask you, Rachel, how did you feel when you went back to the rehab floor? Because we went on a little trek when you came back.
Yeah, emotional. That was like there when I shout out, I told Jenna there was key places I kind of wanted to go. I wanted to go outside to the little like play area. I wanted to go down to the rehab floor, see some of my team down there. I remember the most that room. I don't know if I actually spent as much time as I think I did in my head, but I remember it the most because that was the time where I had to like almost work the hardest, I guess. And it was a very frustrating room for me and very confusing things. But I mean, the whole experience was crazy because that versus the ICUs, I don't remember the ICU. So that was kind of just like seeing something for the first time, it felt like. Whereas the rehab floor, I would kind of get these like spark note of memories and flashbulb memories when I would see certain things, like the chair. I remember the car being there and the hallway that I walked down for the first time because there's like certain like markers on it. Um, yeah, emotional. And seeing Jilly, oh, I love her. Giving her a big hug, taking pictures with everyone, and yeah, it was an emotional week, but such a fun, beautiful week. It was so full circle.
Well, I mean, one thing I wanted to make sure everyone was aware of is that you will be going to medical school and starting in a few months. Is that right?
Yes, that is true. I'm going to
Congratulations.
Lake Erie College of Osteopathic Medicine this fall. I'm ecstatic. It felt so unreal for so long that I still feel like I'm almost in shock. Like I remember reading the email at first and I didn't cry and I was like, okay, let me double check. Let me read this again. Am I in like a fever dream? And then I just bawled just because, and I say it time and time again, I have so many people in my corner and so many strong, amazing people in my corner that I just cannot thank enough. There's so many thank yous I will have in my head when I finally get my white coat this August that it's even like I get choked up thinking about it now just because it's funny because I've had this dream forever. I've always wanted to be a physician, but the why was always kind of what got me. It's like my pre-health advisor at Penn State would be like, okay, but why? What are you going to write on your personal statement? And I'd be like, I want to help people and I want to like save lives. And it's like, okay, you and everybody else. And I struggled with that for a while because it's like, what is my why? And then my why slapped me in the face. And I realized, and I have this kind of tragic gift that I wouldn't wish most people would have, but I have this kind of relatability of like, it's different when someone who's been through it says this will be okay, you will get over this, and there will be dark days and dark thoughts that you feel like will never go away, but they will, because I was there and I felt those things and I had to go through those things and I lost an entire year of college, and things are possible. And you know, it's times like that where you have to really sit down with yourself and say like, is this what I want? You know, cognitively, I left University of Rochester at the intellectual level of a second grader, coming from someone who had just finished their sophomore year of college, dean's list, you know, through and through. It was traumatizing, and I think it felt impossible. And days I would be frustrated and I didn't want to do anything. I didn't want to get off the couch. I didn't want to walk. I didn't want to try practice writing my name. And, you know, and I would cry and I would say, why me? And my mom one day looked at me and she said, you have to stop saying why me. There's no answer to why this happened to you. It's not fair. No one's ever going to say it's fair. It's not fair to anyone who this would happen to. I mean, especially me, because of, you know, how hard I've worked in life to get to the point I was at. But if you say, why me, you are going to be in this constant state of self-pity and you're never going to progress. You're always going to be sad and you're always going to make excuses for not trying to recover. And, you know, I wiped away that last pity tear and I was like, you're right, let's get to work. And I took, that following summer, I took just like super base level community college courses just to kind of test, like, am I ready to go back to school? They were just some gen eds I had to get out of the way. And then I ended up taking calculus the end of that summer and getting an A in it. And I was like, okay, wow, the brain is kind of remarkable and amazing. And I don't even think I did this well in high school calculus, but yeah, so it's the thought of going to medical school is very emotional for me for many, many reasons, but mostly because like I'm so proud of me sorry.
I mean, you should be proud. I mean, this is truly inspirational. And, given your unique experiences, how do you think that will change the way you practice or the kind of doctor that you become?
For sure. I think it instills a very different level of compassion within me, because things aren't as linear as I used to think they are. I'm very type A. I'm very kind of like X, Y, Z, A plus B is C. I need all of that, but it's never like that. And I had to learn the hard way that my life is not linear. It's very curvy. It's up and down. It's circles. And I think just being able to I think it's made me a more empathetic person, and it will make me a more empathetic doctor, because I can kind of sit there and be like, how do you feel? Like, let's talk, let's not be dismissive on any feelings, any thoughts. And especially I am very attention to detail now, because there are many things that I think were overlooked in my first week of altered mental state that people brushed off as, oh, she's stressed for finals, or oh, she's just anxious, or oh, COVID is kind of just making everybody a little stir crazy. And it's like, I think knowing that anything could be a sign for anything, and not really dismissing any signs, symptoms, anything like that, is definitely something that I'm going to take into being a physician now, that I just don't think I would have had, 3 years ago.
I mean, you're just so mature and well-spoken. I just have to make sure you're aware of that. It's very impressive.
Thank you. Yeah, I try, I guess.
Is there anything else either of you want to share with any of the listeners before we wrap up?
I hope that everybody gets to have a patient like Rachael and have a family that cares for somebody as much as Rachel's family cares for them. Because I'm sorry, because she's just so unique and wonderful. And I think all of our patients are very unique, but you don't always get to have that connection. And it was really wonderful. And it still is wonderful to be able to see her flourish. And the day that we snuck her brother to see her, we were all like, okay, where are we going to put him? What place will no one suspect that someone is coming to visit a patient on COVID precautions? And there's COVID lockdown. And it was just this team effort. And I think that for our ICU team, we really rallied around her, because we saw this hope in this horrible experience of a pandemic. And we saw this mom and this dad and these brothers that cared so much for this human being that they couldn't visit. So we had to do it for them. There wasn't an option. And as terrible as it is, we got to know Rachael through them. And so when she started to come around, we're we know her, look at her back there, and I think Rachael had said, knowing your patient is just so important. And sometimes you can't make that connection, but really trying to do it helped us so much in this experience. And maybe as the COVID precautions and stuff lift, and as people aren't on all these visiting restrictions, I hope that it doesn't go away, because that effort can be difficult when you're having those dark days, but it is so rewarding.
Mm-hmm. I agree. And I think it's also important to note that I am fortunate to have the family I do, but not a lot of people are. A lot of people either maybe don't have family, or don't have family that are as involved in their life. And I think that can hurt recovery a lot for somebody. I think when you don't have that extra team outside of the hospital, when you leave, are they going to hold you accountable? Are they going to tell you, you got to stop saying, why me? So I think it's also important to look into that, as well as healthcare providers. It's okay, what support does she have do they have outside of this hospital that is going to continue the care that we've worked so hard to kind of maintain? Also, kind of a final note, I just recently read When Breath Becomes Air. Super amazing book. If anyone listening has not
100%
read it,
agree.
Super easy read, and you will cry. Just a forewarning. But there's, and this is not going to be verbatim, but there's a quote in it that I actually just wrote on a card I wrote to one of my residents when I said goodbye the other day, because she's going to palliative care. And it says, a physician's job is to not bring a patient back to their old life or to 100%. It is to hold their hands and their family's hands as their lives are disintegrating, and help them try to make sense of it in the world until they can do it on their own. some version of that quote, but it sticks with me so hard because it's true. It's like, I think people get so caught up on, oh, she has to be exactly how she was before. She has to be this old Rachel, this, but no, old Rachel was immature and she had a lot to learn, and maybe she was a little reckless with her life. And it's important that, like, in the meantime, you just have to hold the hands of the people that are kind of like at their worst moments that they might ever have in their life, and just try to make sense of it as best as you can until they can finally do that on their own and kind of process it on their own. Because it's hard to process when you're in the moment. It's like you're making decisions, but you haven't even gotten over the sadness of last week. And it's the provider's responsibility who don't, have as much as an emotional attachment. I can't say that Jenna definitely has as much an emotional attachment as my mother does, but to kind of be that like transition stage for them, to kind of hold their hand and say, we will get through this, and this is the science, and this is how it makes sense. And it might not make sense right now, and it's frustrating, and it seems grim, and it seems like there's no light at the end of this tunnel. But once you kind of get over that and you are in that light place and it's ready to let them go, you can't thank your providers enough for allowing that transition of kind of, thank you for like explaining this to me, even though in my brain I wasn't really processing anything. Because it's not going to be like that. You're never going to be the person you were before. It's kind of naive to think that. And I think people get too caught up on striving to do that, whereas it's like, let's strive to get her healthy, and whatever person she decides to be from that is kind of beautiful. It's like I lived two lives, and neither one is more perfect than the other, but it's beautiful to see that, like, I don't even recognize who I was in 2019 just because it's so different, and it's different in good ways. I don't know if I was meant to go through this, but I've learned so much from it that it's crazy to say grateful, but yeah, and I wouldn't have met the amazing people I met now, and had the connections and been able to shadow there and kind of see it firsthand. There's just many things I wouldn't have been able to do things like this and tell my story and like inspire people, and especially on something that's kind of rarely talked about. I had no idea what autoimmune encephalitis was until I had it. My mom had never even said those words together, So it's bringing awareness to something until it's too late, that I find great passion and kind of closure in.
I mean, thank you both so much for joining us. We really appreciate your time. And I bet a lot of people are eager to see your future successes, Rachael.
Thank you. Thank you.
For anyone else that's interested in reading Rachel's story of hope or any of our other stories, I would encourage you to go to currents.neurocriticalcare.org and check them out. Thanks for joining today.
Thanks for having us. This is awesome.